Hi, this is Kara from the Special Needs Mom podcast.
And this is Angela from Especially Organized, Sensible Solutions for Special Needs Moms.
We have this heart for special needs moms. And so we thought, you know what, let's combine forces. And we have come up with what we're calling the Purge Party. And you can pretty much guess what it is. It's a party where we're going to come together and we're going to purge or, in general, accomplish a goal, a small goal together. So we have set this for January 27th, starting at 8 o'clock for my Pacific Coast people.
Which means 11 o'clock for all of you on the East Coast. So this is an opportunity. If you have something on your to-do list that has just been stuck there and you are wanting to move it up on the list, you're wanting to tackle, maybe it's a space or an area of your home or a category in your home that has just needed a little time and attention. This is your opportunity for you to be online with us while you work and have access for us to help you answer your questions, help guide you, and just serve you for those 2 hours.
Yeah, exactly. And I think you can tell like what we've designed is just this very high level of support for that project that you just haven't been able to tackle on your own. The thing that we are envisioning is that you get to leave this purge party feeling so accomplished because you did the thing. You started the year off getting that thing done that you were stuck on last year. And so it's a momentum builder, if you will. You can go ahead and sign up. We have a link ready for you. And we are offering this for $40 for the whole experience.
Absolutely. And we hope you'll join us. I think it's going to be really fun. It's going to be a great group of moms of special needs kids. So we all get each other. We all have an understanding of what it's like to have something on our to-do list, but just we haven't been able to tackle it yet. So I hope that you will join us. We're super excited to bring this to you, and we are thrilled to work with you.
All right. We'll see you all there. Hi, I'm Kara, life coach, wife, and mom to 4 incredible and unique children. It wasn't all that long ago that my son received a diagnosis that had my world come crashing down. I lacked the ability to see past the circumstances, which felt impossible, and the dreams I once had for my life and family felt destroyed. Fast forward past many years of surviving and not at all thriving, and you'll see a mom who trusts that she can handle anything that comes her way and has access to the power and confidence that once felt so lacking. I created the Special Needs Mom podcast to create connection and community with moms who find themselves feeling trapped and with no one who really understands. My intention is to spark the flare of possibility in your own life and rekindle your ability to dream. This isn't a podcast about your special needs child. This is a podcast about you. If you are a mom who feels anxious, alone, or stuck, then you are in the right place. Welcome. Hello and welcome to the Special Needs Mom podcast. Today we have another amazing interview style episode. I just actually got done recording with this guest, and had we both had more time, we could have talked a lot longer. I think I said that every time. It's just like I don't want to end these conversations. It's like we get to the end and like it opens up so many more things to talk about. Our guest today, let me tell you a little bit about her. Her name is Queren King, and she is an events and video producer for Mother Earth News. She's a professional photographer, a certified aromatherapist, and a first-generation Mexican immigrant who became a U.S. citizen in 2019. How cool is that? She's a full-time mother of 2, and her son was born with a genetic disorder called OTS2. It's very rare, with only 150 cases worldwide. Her son is still quite young, and so she shares that it's been a very transformational year. And in this episode, she's going to share about what we call the becoming. Her son just turned 16 months, and she shares about the early days. We talk about those moments where we look back and we just don't even know how we did it. So she has a lot of those moments in her son's life. We talk about something that I think is really, I think a lot of you are going to relate to it. It's about trauma from childhood being stirred up and brought to the surface through parenting these children. And specifically for her, it was the trauma of not belonging. And so she shares a little bit more about that experience. I think it's really, really powerful. And I think a lot of you will relate to it, even though your story may not be that you immigrated from Mexico. It may be very different, but I think this is the power of story. She has a lot of wisdom that she's figured out so much in these 16 months being her son's mom. And she talks about how to sit with tough emotions. And then at the very end, we talk a little bit about aromatherapy, because I figured, you know what, if I have an aromatherapist on the show, we've got to have a little nugget here and there about aromatherapy. So I think you're going to really find a lot of value and fun just in incorporating something in your life that might bring a little layer of support. Without further ado, let's get right into the episode. Queren, it has been a long time coming to have this conversation. I'm really excited to meet with you and to have you on the show. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. I don't even know how long it's been. It feels
it's been a while.
Months.
I definitely have lost track of time as well. I think it's all perfect timing. So it's all good.
I agree. I feel like this is the best time to have the conversation. And as I was saying earlier, I feel like I'm in a better mental space to be able to share. And that's kind of been just a part of this process for me personally, to talk about what experience we've had so far. And I wasn't quite ready to talk about it before, but now I feel like I'm in a really great state of mind.
Yeah. And I think it's funny for me, because I know your journey is really barely a year old as far as having a child that has disabilities and medical complexities. It's so interesting looking back, like from my journey, 11 years, that I'm like, I can't even imagine being stable enough to be like in your shoes, so functional a year in. So I'm very impressed. And
thank you.
Everyone got to hear a little bit about your picture in the introduction, but I'd really love to hear in your words a little bit about what I call the becoming of being a mom to a child that has disabilities. And so I'd love to hear a little bit about this journey and how you would describe it.
Well, I love that you call it becoming, because I don't have a word for it. And it's sort of on a daily basis, like, where am I, or what is this, or who am I? And you mentioned like how I'm dealing with it so well, essentially. And I get that a lot. And I think part of it is that I had a pretty tough childhood as far as like things that I experienced, and then immigrating to the United States. And so I am in a lot of ways, I feel like I was sort of prepared for something like this to happen. It's troublesome because it's like, nobody wants this to be their journey when they have a baby. I guess I can go back to just being pregnant and what that was like. Just to say where we're at, Asher is 16 months at this point, and we really didn't know anything before Asher was born. To share a little bit about that, so Asher has a genetic syndrome called OTS2, and OTS2 is not necessarily the name. It doesn't actually have like a name that people can go by. That's just what we parents call it, OTS2, because that's the diagnosis we were given. And OTS2 is a deletion in a chromosome. And I think some people are pretty familiar with that from what I've shared with people around me. Like, they usually, when I say that, they're like, oh, okay. Like, I kind of know what that is. Well, I had no idea what that was. I have no idea.
I think they might just be pretending too.
Yeah, maybe they're
probably
pretending.
Like, okay, I've heard of chromosomes before, so that makes sense.
Yeah. So his is particularly on chromosome 7, and chromosome 7 is pretty long. His deletion is somewhat smack in the middle, which is something that I generally have a hard time grasping, because while they haven't done actually, there's only one research paper on OTS2, there isn't much information to go off of. And so this group of people that are diagnosed with OTS2 is in the 150 range, which I have seen smaller groups now that I'm like immersed in this space, but it is really small worldwide. And so the people that know the most about it are the parents of children who have OTS2. So when I was pregnant, we lived on a homestead. We lived on a homestead for like 7 years. And I would say I had a pretty normal pregnancy, but I always think about the fact that it was during a pandemic and I saw myself and myself only and my husband, but like, there was no outside perspective. And so I just thought what I was experiencing was totally normal. I was very tired, more than normal. And I have a pretty high threshold for most things. And that's probably why I carry myself super well. You would never know what's going on. And so anyway,
I know, I'm the same. I'm like, yeah, I feel ya.
Yes. And so when people tell me like, oh, you're doing this so well, especially family, I'm like, I have moments that are pretty rough, but I have a pretty positive attitude in life because especially now, I feel like you can't waste time. Yeah, I was very tired, had a lot of pelvic pressure and pain, and I didn't realize that maybe that was a symptom of something. Now come to find, I didn't feel Asher kick as much as you would expect to feel a baby kick. And I didn't really realize that until months after he was born. And as I started to see how his body was developing, that was kind of a sign. But when they would ask me like, do you feel the baby kick? I did, but I was like, I don't know what you mean by like, how is it supposed to actually feel? No one can really describe that, I guess. But I had my daughter 6 years before. And so I knew what it was like to be pregnant, but it'd been so long. I just thought it was normal. So fast forward when I was about 9 months, it was like almost a week before he was supposed to be born. I went to the doctor and they were just concerned about some stuff. And I had delivered my daughter really quickly. And so they were like, we're going to have to induce you. And so I had a really tough time with that. I went and got induced and thought everything was going to go super fast, like it did the time before. And it didn't. Everything was really slow. And Asher's heart rate was all over the place. And I had a similar experience with my daughter, so I didn't think anything of it. But I pushed for 3 hours. Asher wasn't coming out. I ended up actually being able to have him without having to have a C-section, which was like crazy because at that point, his heart rate was all over the place. So that was like, just, anything can happen. And Boston had a weird heartbeat. But with Asher, it makes more sense now. And so he came out and he was completely purple, wasn't breathing. I kept asking for him and they were like, their job is to keep him separate from me. And so I kept asking, what's wrong? What's wrong? And he did eventually cry and the whole NICU was there. Everything was okay for like the following hours, except that Asher he was not latching. He couldn't feed. And so I had nurse after nurse, a lactation nurse come, and every hour of the day they were with me. At that point, like I thought, maybe he's just not latching. Maybe it's something with me. And so come to find now, feeding has been like the biggest struggle with Asher. And so then we were at the hospital for a really long time. I say long time, that's not really true. It was 5 days, but it felt like a really long time. And now I think back to that time and I love that intimate 5 days that we had with him because everything went crazy after we left the hospital. And so, so his bilirubins were actually really high and they couldn't figure out why. And so he was like pricked and tested every day and they weren't going down. So they did eventually send us home with the light and we were able to somehow magically make it all work. And we lived 2 hours away from the hospital because we lived on a homestead. And so it was this huge ordeal to be able to like take the lights and come back every day with him and have him checked. So it was for the first few days of having a baby. When I think about it.
You were driving to the hospital to get him checked every day?
Yeah, they had to prick him every day. Mm-hmm.
Back and forth. So 4 hours?
Yes. That's just the beginning.
You're like, that's nothing. That's like not even the peak of the story here. That is awful.
And I want to share this story about him because for it to happen when you just had a baby, it is so tough. And I have no idea how I did it. I just had to do it. And so I did it. So we were driving back and forth to Kansas City and having him checked to make sure that his bilirubin numbers were coming down. And keep in mind, he was also not feeding well. So it was like this, at that point, I was still trying to nurse him and pumping, and he was like not taking any bottle. It was very, very chaotic. Because we were going back and forth, we ended up seeing the doctor like every day. And so on day 8, I remember exactly it was day 8, they listened to his heart and they were like, he sounds like he has a murmur, but we don't, they were like, we can't tell you what it is. We can just hear it. So we're going to send you to the cardiologist today. So I'm there to be checking him for his bilirubins and his feedings. And all of a sudden they're like, his heart doesn't sound right. So they sent me, and we are lucky that we have Children's Mercy Hospital in Kansas City. So they sent me there and they were able to like see him that same day and like figure it all. And he was 8 days old. So they're feeling pretty panicked because, one, I think that they missed it at the hospital. They didn't hear that. So we rushed to Children's Mercy, and I'm going with my 6-year-old because my husband's working. So I've got the two of them. And I always think back to the stories and I'm like, how the heck did I do this? Because I think about it back then, I was like, this is totally fine. And then now I'm like, that was not
like, that was not fine in any way.
Yes.
It's almost just like, I think this is the power of mother. I think we really dig in that capacity that we don't always recognize that we have. And I think it's a really beautiful thing to reflect on, the resources that you tapped into at that time. Because I think looking back, all of us are like, what? That sounds awful. Like, and it sounds like, how would you do that? And I think probably every listener has their own story of the thing that they did that they're like, I don't even know how I did that. Like, I don't even know how I survived the first year after we got home from the hospital. Like, I just don't even know.
Yeah. And I remember having a conversation with my husband, like, I'm not going to the cardiologist by myself again. And at the time, it was weird because it was like pandemic times, like thick of pandemic times. And so really, we weren't allowed to, like, I wasn't even supposed to take Boston, but I had to because I had nowhere else to leave her. They were so gracious. They like put her to color and stuff, but this was a 4-hour appointment.
Yeah.
They did like,
how old was your daughter who was tagging along at that time?
She would have still been 5 at the time. Okay, so she's very, very talkative, very, like, she knew something was going on.
Yeah.
She's very aware. Yeah. So we're there, and then they do everything that they have to do. They do an EKG and echocardiogram, and it's, you're seeing your tiny little baby. And he was 6 pounds. And actually at this point he was 5.5 pounds because he'd lost too much weight from not feeding. So when I got the results, and I don't know all of the technical terms, but they drew me a really cute picture and were able to tell me like what it was. He had 4 heart defects, what I found out. They were all wait and see type of thing. So here we go again. We have to come see the cardiologist every week because newborn hearts change so quickly. So we're going every week now. And then I'm also checking in with the pediatrician. And so we're going in, and really where we are today is that one of his heart defects is gone. That was one that just naturally closed. Again, I don't know all the details, but it was an artery that had an issue. And then I do know he has pulmonary valve stenosis, which is a thickened valve in his heart, and he will forever have that. And then he has 2 holes in his heart. And so those are remaining and not as big of a concern, but his pulmonary valve stenosis is something that we have to continually like look at. So that was daunting at the time, but what happened eventually is he was still not feeding, and he was essentially regurgitating everything he ate. And everybody kept telling me he just had acid reflux. He has acid reflux. And I knew something was not right because my other baby had acid reflux, but this was different. And so I called all the time and talked to them, and I tried like 5 or 6 different formulas, and he wasn't even 2 months. I mean, I tried so many different things. I tried so many bottles, and he just wasn't feeding right. And he would take some, and then he would regurgitate it. So when he was almost 2 months, he started vomiting really, really badly. And when babies, I learned when they vomit and they get dehydrated, they don't want it to consume anything else. And so he had reached the point where it's painful to talk about now, but his eyes would roll to the back of his head. and he just wasn't waking, like he would just stay asleep. So that's when I made the call to Children's Mercy, and I said, this is what is happening, and they're connected to the pediatrician. And they're like, well, we want you to drive him right now, but we want you to take him to Children's Mercy. You can't take him anywhere else. And so here we go, 2 hours away again, and we drive him. And at this point, he was doing pretty bad. He was essentially, what I know now is he was having seizures and was in shock. And so we drove as fast as we could, and way faster than we should have been probably. But we did have an ambulance meet us halfway just to, because we didn't know, I didn't know what was happening. And one of the things that started happening, and you mentioned sharing the raw and like the tough moments, he started vomiting blood at 2, and he was like this tiny 5.5 pound baby. At this point, he did not, I mean, he looked sickly. And so we had them check him halfway, and they somehow determined that he was still okay to make it to the hospital, which he did make it to the hospital. But when we got to the hospital, I mean, it's like out of a movie. There was like dozens of people around this tiny little baby because they couldn't figure out what was wrong with him. And they couldn't find his veins. They couldn't get anything in him. So they had all these specialists trying to find his veins. It's that moment where like everyone's quiet and even the doctors aren't saying anything. And you're just like, what is happening? And they're sending in the person who, I forget their actual title, but it's like the person who's there, kind of like when you have hospice for
like
an
the
elderly.
social worker, maybe?
Yeah. And so they sent her in, and I was like, what is going on? So we thought for sure we were losing Asher at that point. I still think it's a miracle that he made it through that, because that was just crazy. So they ended up doing like a whole body sonogram. Once they were able to like get fluids in him and sort of see some sort of change. I mean, they were like vacuuming out stuff out of his nose because everything was coming out. It's like everything was just coming out. So they found out that he had, which sounds like pulmonary valve stenosis. He had pyloric stenosis, and it's a thickening of a valve in the intestine and the stomach. So any food that he was consuming was not getting through his stomach to empty like normal. They were able to figure that out, and they were like, we can't do surgery. Surgery was like the least of the concern, because surgery was like an hour long. Pyloric stenosis, if it's caught early, they can just do it really like within an hour and they're done. But Asher wasn't stable. And I still to this day don't understand why it was missed and why it was so severe the way that it was. Because when I read about it or hear about it, they can generally tell it's happening by feeling their like abdomen. I mean, I didn't notice anything and the doctor didn't notice anything. And so I don't know if it just happened really quickly, because it usually happens at 2 months and it is very rare. But that's not like the most rare out of all things. And so he was in the PICU for 24 hours before surgery. He finally got clear for surgery, and surgery went really well. But at this point, he was still not feeding. And so he had all eyes on him. Like everybody was coming through and checking on him. They're like, if everything goes well, once after surgery, if he starts eating well, then he can go home and you're good to go. And so he did not eat well. Every time he ate, he would choke, and he would do the same thing that was happening before. So now we think of pyloric as kind of like this miracle that sort of tied it all together. They sent the geneticist to our room to talk to us. And they were like, we just want to let you know that there's a lot of things happening here. You know, your son has a heart defect or several heart defects. He had this really rare thing happen to him. He's not feeding well. His toes are overlapping. There's just different things. And they were very delicate about it, because I mean, you have this tiny baby that you're like, this baby is perfect, you know?
Yeah.
So they have to tell you, like, here's what's going on. And they're like, we think that you should have genetics ran. And I see I'm part of a lot of Facebook groups, and I see people talking about getting their genetic testing done and like how hard they had to work to get that, or they know all the terms and all the names of all these testings. I have no idea. I just know that it took months to get results. And I know that is as far in depth as they can go. And they took our blood samples and they took his. 4 months, we sat not knowing what was going on. And that was really hard. It was extremely hard to just be in this limbo of, does he have something that is so extreme that we might not have him for very long? Or is this something that we don't even have to worry about? So you're like playing mind games constantly.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I can imagine.
Trying to enjoy this newborn that I have at home. And so, and my 5-year-old at the time. So yeah, that was kind of the beginning of everything. And we were on a waiting game at that point. And we did get a result that told us he had every chromosome. They were all there. And that was normal. And so once they know that, then they have to look deeper when there are other serious issues happening. And that's sort of what ended up happening at that point. So that's the journey up until, this is like 6 weeks, 8 weeks into having Asher. All at the same time, I'm going through postpartum and trying to figure out how I'm feeling. I had mentioned earlier that it's challenging for me to talk about all of this because I never know how to talk about it. It's always, what is the best way to articulate this to people? And I shared recently just how lonely this space can be of having a child that has special needs. And, now that we know more about it, where he's at in his milestones and what we have ahead of us. And it's just so hard to find commonality with others about where we're at or where he's at.
Yeah, I'm glad you went a little deeper into what makes it so lonely. And I think it's that piece of like finding that commonality, right? We all want to belong. And I think when you now have a family that has a very different dynamic than you thought it would, and then probably everyone I think what happens in our mind is like, oh, we don't belong in this group anymore. And like, we haven't yet found the group where we do belong. And like you said, there's 150 people known that have this condition. Well, yeah, you can belong to that group. I'm sure it's not the same, right? It's not meeting
and
that need.
It's like online. But I will say that I'm thankful that I have this group online because I can reach out to someone and say, or just even to the group, like, hey, we're having feeding problems. Has anyone experienced this? One thing with his diagnosis is that it's so not well researched. And so where we're at is someone else could have something, but that doesn't mean that your child is going to present the same thing. Like I haven't met another parent in the group who's had a child who had pyloric stenosis or had all of his heart conditions when they were born. That hasn't happened. And it might never happen. And so you just have to be okay with it not happening. And I think that's where it's challenging, where it's like, I may never find that, whatever it is that I'm trying to find. And I mentioned earlier, like as a child, I moved to the US when I was 10 and I always felt like I didn't belong. And so it's brought on like trauma from my childhood of like not belonging and wanting him so badly to belong. And I've learned so much in the last like 16 months of like, he does belong because he belongs in our family and he's meant to be with us and we're doing the best that we can for him. So that's kind of the pivotal point of everything when we got this testing. It was like reality being told like we need to do a testing because there is something going on, but we can't say for sure what it is. And that's when I learned that doctors don't know everything.
Oh, yes. We've all learned. I think it's so interesting. I think that's a definitely part of the becoming for all of us. I mean, I'm sure not everyone starts out revering and respecting. And I still do revere and respect doctors. I mean, it's
absolutely
what they do, and it's not a glorious job. When we get the front row seat, and it's I don't know that I would ever want to be a doctor. I think we learn that they don't know everything. Especially what I think was most interesting to me is realizing how when we're working with all the specialists, that the specialists truly know very little about the other specialties. So if you're talking to cardiology, they really don't know that much about endocrinology.
Right.
And realizing, because we are actually the ones front row seats in each department, that we are the ones that have to kind of bring them all together, and never would have thought of that. So it's interesting. Thank you for mentioning the piece about your childhood trauma being uprooted and reinvigorated, if you will, from the experience with your son. Because I think that, I don't want to say it happens for all of us, but I think it's very common. I think it can be confusing, because I think what I've experienced is a little bit like wait, why is this thing so present right now and bothering me so much when it's not the thing about my son? It's something totally unrelated. It's something, from my past, from my childhood, right? And I'm like, wait, what? This doesn't make sense. Like, I should be very upset about this thing with my son. And what I've learned, and kind of helps me normalize it, is that actually that is very, very common in grief. Is that one of my friends just gave me this picture. I was like, oh, this was so good. She said, it's kind of like when I'm in a period where things have quieted down. And so medical wise, things are good. But then I'm finding like, oh, wow, like there's all these other things coming up, like in my experience, not necessarily my son's, but of course his too. And she's like, it's like being in a car and like having the brakes all of a sudden slammed on, like the medical stuff stops, but all the packages and the boxes in the trunk get thrown up to the front.
Oh my gosh, it's perfect.
I was like, that is so good. I was like, that really helped me recognize, because those boxes, remember, like they have nothing to do with my child's issues, right? Like his challenges. It's like my life, right? My life, all the things, kind of all the boxes getting flown forward. I just really think that that is helpful. It was really helpful to me. I wanted to highlight it because I think it sounds like you've experienced some of that. There's something about like, it's your son's experience, it's his life, but also it's your life. And so it's one of those things where it's like, how do we honor our experience and give space for that while also honoring our children's unique experience and space for that? And then I think there might be a lot of gray in between. What are your thoughts, and what do you find is the most challenging for you in that area?
Yeah, it's sort of complicated for me, and I don't have like the perfect answer or solution to this. And I might feel differently about it in like 5 months, as I mentioned before. So when I started learning about what was going on, like I remember even like going to a heart appointment. So first of all, I've always been really active on social media. I worked in social media since 2012. And so I've always been present to some degree, and I enjoy, sharing what knowledge or whatever I can pass down to somebody else. And so I at first didn't really think much of it because he was so tiny. And I was like, okay, like this is a great way to let other people in our lives know that this is happening to us. And so that they can understand that this is where we're at right now. And I was very transparent about it because I've always had this rule for myself of like being authentic and really letting people know the reality of a situation, especially because I've worked in social media for a long time. So I've always struggled with the fakeness that you can find in social media. And I think a lot of us do, and a lot of us are talking about that now. But I just personally have always struggled with that. And I think it goes back to, again, my childhood trauma of not being able to be who I wanted to be or expressing who I was because of my situation. So I guess what I'm trying to say is I was undocumented when I moved to the US. And that was very much a thing that I didn't tell anybody. And so I just kind of carried on, not really truly being me, I guess. It sounds quite bad, but I've come to terms with it now that.
No, I can feel like the impact. It's almost like there's this maybe even spoken, but maybe unspoken of like, we have to hide. Like, this is something that we have to hide. Like, it's not okay. Yeah. I'm sure it was like, this is not okay for people to know about you. Like, wow, I can't imagine a child.
And there's a lot of things that I've uncovered over time where it's like, oh, was I like assimilating to everybody else? And I wanted to, again, back to like, I wanted to belong. And it's so interesting because I was like a thing that I struggle with so much, but I was so good at belonging. Like I could make myself belong somewhere very easily. And so now, that's like my rule of like being authentic and staying true to who I am. And I guess it maybe comes with time and being older. Maybe you just learn over years to just not give a crap. But yeah, so going back to like the social thing. So I was really, the way we express ourselves these days is social media. That's how we communicate with people who aren't close to us, and how we're able to show somebody, like, for example, right now, like first day of school, like you get to do those things. And so when Asher was born, I knew people were wondering what was going on, and I was being asked. And the easiest way to share that was to make a post or a story or something that connected with everyone, because something that happens when you have a child who's going through a health crisis or has something going on is that everybody's asking you the same question. Mm-hmm. Every doctor is asking you the same question, every nurse, and you're literally repeating yourself every single time. And it is so mentally exhausting. And they even apologize because they're like, I'm sorry that I have to ask you again. Can you please give me the rundown? Which I kind of just gave you the rundown a little bit. And I'm so much better about doing it now than at that time. It was so exhausting. Then I saw it as like, oh, I'm just sharing and giving out information of what's going on. And then I started to like follow accounts who were maybe similar. I mean, the first thing I did when we found out his diagnosis 4 months after this test was done is I started looking up the hashtag of OTS2. I was like, I have to find someone. And I didn't know about the group yet. So I found someone and I reached out to them, and they gave me some insight of like what they were experiencing. And then I started following other accounts with other kids who had other diagnoses. And then I started to see a pattern of parents sharing about their child and advocating. And I'm all about advocating. I think it's wonderful. And I've been able to do that already. But then I started to think of like, I'm sharing all of this personal information about my son, and what is the end goal here? Like, what is, he doesn't have a voice, especially right now. And especially because we don't know how he's going to be able to communicate in the future. We have no idea if he's going to be able to speak normal, or a normal, quote unquote, or if he's going to have to do sign language. We just don't know that. And so I started to really reflect on what it means to like make a child the poster child of something. And in this instance, it is a very small pool of children. But at the same time, I see me looking for someone who had a child with OTS2 and not finding it. And I was like desperate, crying, looking for like that human being who could give me some clarity as to where they were. And so it's very complicated. You kind of are in a circle with it. And during this process, I came across a woman who, her Facebook is a diary of a mom, and she has a daughter who has autism, and she shares so beautifully about their experience. And she's taught me so much about how to be able to share without violating your child's privacy, because I think that's what it comes down to. She has this perspective from being a mom and not sharing all of the details of her child. And so I connected really well with the way that she was communicating. And she goes as far as not sharing the names of her family. So she has made up names for all of her family. I had to slow down and like not really post every little thing, because one, I was excited every time Asher did something. And so I wanted to share. And then I was like realizing, like, what does this mean to the average parent who doesn't know how many therapy sessions it takes to get to this tiny inch stone, as we call them in our groups? They have no idea. And it's like, how can I have a conversation, an authentic conversation with someone to really share what this experience is like that I'm walking through, that's even not the same as someone else who has a child with special needs. I mean, I'm in this very unique situation. So yeah, I don't have the perfect answer, but it's just being consciously aware of like what you're doing, what you're putting out there, and asking yourself why you're doing it and understanding why you're doing it, because you could be doing it for the wrong reason.
I think there's so much power. I mean, I'm a coach. I geek out at questions. It's all about powerful questioning. I think you are asking such a good question. Like, you're looking at the intention, the why behind it. And I think that could actually be really helpful guidance, because I struggle with this as well, especially because there's this interesting dynamic where it's like, I want people to know what I'm experiencing in terms of like my home life. And I believe that most people, if they heard it, their jaws would drop. They'd be like, are you kidding me? Right? Like even doctors, I tell them like, yeah, this is what's happening. And yet sharing the details of that, it just doesn't feel like it honors my son. Right? Because it's almost like, wait, would I want everyone to know like the areas that I was struggling most, and knowing that people won't look at that and be like, oh, that's cool. Their jaws will drop. Right. And so, but then there's this dynamic of like, but I want to be seen, right? Like I want people to know my experiences. And I think that's kind of where, I mean, I'm just kind of talking through this myself to even navigate it. I think that might be where these smaller communities come into place, where it is a safe place, where it's not blasting it all over the internet, but it's actually saying, okay, this is a group where we have a code of ethics, if you will, whether it's spoken or unspoken, that it's a private conversation. I know we have a tumor group, craniopharyngioma group, for my son's type of tumor. And, you know, there's a lot of medical information shared in there, what people are doing and taking and like, and all the things. It has that a little bit of a privacy where you honor that, like, this is a space where we talk about this, but we wouldn't put this publicly on the page, you know?
Yeah.
Or on the whatever. So I don't know. Thank you for bringing that up. I think, you know, I know people that listen to the podcast are all over the board. Like some are like, I don't do social media at all. And some are like whizzes who I probably need to hire to help me do my social media. So if you're listening to this and you're like, I'm really good at social media, I want to hear from you, because I'm kind of like, I don't know if I'm ever going to pull this together.
It's so much work for one person.
Yes.
And I think one thing to think about too is I was working a job that in hindsight was not very healthy for me when all this was happening. And I remember when I shared about this happening, that they were like, oh, well, you're going to be able to have like this platform online about your son. And my response was like, I don't even think I can think about that right now. Or like, maybe that's not even a desire that I have. And I still don't know, like, if that's something that I would want to do, because then one thing that can happen is your whole identity revolves around this diagnosis that your child has. And maybe that's okay for someone because they can become really great advocates. But I tend to be the type of person who can put herself last. Then that's typically when I have a lot of tension and anxiety, not giving yourself time and like getting your identity tied up into your son's or your child's diagnosis. And I want to know a lot and I want to be supportive. I mean, we do all types of therapy and we're doing as much as we can. And sometimes people give me unsolicited advice, people who are maybe not in the thick of it. And I have learned to be like, hey, I love this awesome advice that you have gathered for me here. And I appreciate the thought and the time you took to do this, but I'm at max capacity right now. And we are doing the best that we can. And one thing is making sure that Asher is happy and is having a good time at home or wherever we go. Although PT, physical therapy sessions are grueling, but you know, being able to have those boundaries. And I think that's what I'm learning, like having the boundaries of what I am sharing, what I'm not sharing, how much I'm talking about it, and who is it serving well, because I think it can really get exhausting. And I can only come to this conclusion. And somebody told me, like, how did you get to this so quickly? Because he's only 16 months. And I was like, well, that's where I'm at right now. But also going back to like my childhood, I had to learn to adapt and enjoy whatever situation I was in. And I love Asher so much. And he has one of the best, happiest personalities. And so I want to stop everything and just enjoy that about him and put aside the thoughts that I have when we're at PT or when we're at speech, or when I see another baby who's like crawling already and they're like half his age. And so just like enjoying him, because he's not going to be this little. And you said it at the beginning, 10 years from now, I'm going to be somewhere else. And I want to look back and say, I got to enjoy Asher when he was a baby and a toddler and a 5-year-old. and in whatever capacity that is, because he is going to be going at a different pace, at his own pace, and it is going to be grueling at times. But having that reminder of like time, it just slips away so quickly.
I think it's so beautiful. I wish so much that I had that insight 10 years ago. The comment I made earlier, I almost wish I didn't say that because I don't want to be like, oh, you have it all together. Because I so deeply know, like, right. I so deeply know that, like, no, you have no idea.
I was like crying 2 days ago.
I know we look like we don't, we are all put together, but that is a lifelong learned way of showing up. But I think perhaps what I sensed is that wisdom that you have of actually being like, yes, we have the challenges, we have the PTs and all the things, but like really being able to enjoy that now. That's I think what I'm like, wow, like that's what you've been able to land so early on. And that's why I think it's amazing for, I think, listeners to hear that as well. Because I think wherever we are, right? So not from a place of judgment that we should have got there earlier, but just recognizing, okay, like this is something that you've been able to do. And I think it can offer so much peace of being able to just be where you're at now and enjoy that peace.
Can I just be super clear? So yes, I think that it is great for others to hear that you can land in that place, because I used to wonder at those very early stages. And I sort of told myself, like, you have to hurry up and do all the things that you've learned, all the therapy sessions you've gone to. And again, I think I was having therapy during this entire process, and I was lucky to have access to that. And to tell myself to get there because time was going to slip and he was going to be in a different spot. And it was hard. There were tears, there was so much. And even just a few weeks ago, and that's what I wanted to be clear on, is I was a tense mess. Like I had to go get a massage and I had to stop everything I was doing completely. Like I'm a very active person, and I had to say, okay, this is going out the door. This is going out the door because this is what's important. And I have to do this thing. And it is, you've said the word grief. The first thing his pediatrician told me was that, because she has a son who has autism, and she said, you are going to grieve this entire process, but you're going to have joyous moments throughout it. And I remember being so angry at her when she said that, because I couldn't wrap my brain around the fact that I was going to be grieving my son because he's alive and well. And I get teary-eyed talking about it. But she told me that. And a few weeks ago, I was like, oh my gosh, I totally have been grieving, because I have been angry. I've been happy. I've been mad. I've gone all around the circle. And that's kind of been like the reality of like, oh, I am grieving, but it's not a bad thing. It's just coming to terms and being able to enjoy what is supposed to be enjoyed. And even enjoy his physical therapy when he's like trying super hard, because he is trying to thrive. But yes, a few weeks ago, I had to just say, I'm not doing anything. I'm just going to rest because that's most important. And I've thrown out my back. I mean, it was just like all these like signs of, okay, you have got to stop yourself and take a few steps back and reset. And it was the best thing that I could have done, because I feel so much better. And I'm like, okay, maybe I was just doing that thing because I felt like I had to do it, because my identity was kind of getting a little lost in all of this stuff that's going on everywhere, but it's not serving anybody, because then I'm mad at everything. So yes, you can find those joyous moments and you can have yourself together, but it's also sitting with those really tough emotions and being like, yes, this sucks. Yes, I'm feeling this way. And that's okay. It's totally valid to feel the way I'm feeling right now.
So well said. I think that's been the biggest misconception that I've noticed that we have about grief. I had it as well, that I feel like the misconception I had was like, oh, you do this thing and then you're past it and then you're just happy.
Yes.
Like, well, I don't know where I got that, but I think our culture has that, right? It's like, okay, we're done being sad now. Now it's time to be happy. I'm grossly simplifying it, obviously. Thank you for pulling back the curtain and saying, yeah, no, this is a realization that you've probably been building over several months. But even 2 weeks ago, you said, oh, actually, now I'm at a point where like I'm not doing well. Like I need a break, and probably had to grieve the fact that like you couldn't do it all. And I think it's like this a better picture is this going back and forth and being able to move more fluidly from those joyous moments and then move into the sad and the tender and the more grief filled moments, and recognizing that they coexist. And that's how they were designed to be, versus this destination that we're going to get to where we're going to just be happy, which is, it sounds so silly when I say it like that, but it's really the model that I came into motherhood with. And we can all see why it didn't work.
It's a very dangerous way of like looking at things. And it's made me a better parent with my daughter. I'm far more patient with her now than I was before. And the original reason I started going to therapy was because I was having this anxiety that was like being brought on by being a mom. And it was bringing in this like childhood trauma out. And I was like not the happiest person around the people that I love. And so I started going for that reason. And then now with all of this that happened, I realized I can be a better parent for Boston too. Like that, and a better everything really. But the way I thought about it before was more linear, like you're saying, where like, yes, I'm going to do all this stuff and then I'm going to be happy all the time.
Yeah.
And it's so silly to think like that because that's so unrealistic. And so now it's more of like, we're going to have a ton of bumps and we're going to find some really awesome moments within those bumps. And I think one thing that's important for me is not to lose that identity. And so, that's the story for me, and it might be different for somebody else.
Thank you so much for sharing. And again, the authenticity, and you've said it a couple times, this is where I'm at right now. And I love that because it leaves so much room for growth. And I think this is actually where our culture has gotten a little like, I don't know why we get like, oh, this is how you think and this is how you have to think forever. I think that just that saying that you have, it leaves so much room for your evolution, your growth, but also to make you totally okay now, right? I wanted to point that out. Well, I wanted to take this for a totally different turn because I was like, you know what? You're an aromatherapist and I don't meet that many aromatherapists. And I thought, maybe we should ask for just any insight you would have to the fellow mothers of how they might support themselves in this journey through the modality of aromatherapy.
Yeah, this is such a great topic because this is like my bread and butter. So again, I was talking about like the things that I have to let go of at times. And so I am a big time gardener. I'm going through the Master Gardeners program right now. I'm a certified aromatherapist. And one of the things that I'm really passionate about is healing through plants. And that's been really helpful to me. So I could go into a million directions because I have so much to share when it comes to this. And I hope to be able to share more about this. And I think if you are struggling with grief or you are just in general trying to find some me time in the midst of this chaos, I would say that my top oils are Melissa and anything citrus in the citrus family. So like neroli is the flower from the grapefruit. And those are all very calming for anxiety and grief. And so grapefruit is a really great one as well. I could just smell those all day. Like imagine yourself, this is how I see it. Imagine yourself in a place where there's all that they're growing are grapefruits and oranges. And you're like peeling an orange. Like that's the kind of feeling that I get when it comes to those oils. And so that's kind of what you'll experience by having one of those.
Thank you for that. I actually have Citrus Bliss going on right now, which is like a think of vanilla and then a citrus blend.
Yeah.
And I find that it just is such an uplifting fragrance for me to have going. And also I will, like, if I'm kind of noticing that I'm low, I did this actually last week. I was like, I was just kind of feeling lower. I, did all the things to support myself and then kind of got to a point where I was like, you know what? It's time to go put on your oils, put some music on, and then just kind of keep moving rather than just sitting in the low space, kind of mucking around in that.
Yes, I have to remind myself to do that as well. And another thing that you can do, so I actually grow Melissa in a pot. And so what you can do is you can grow some, if you can't grow, I have a citrus plant and I'm experimenting because I'm in Kansas, but during the winter, it blooms inside. And so all I smell are the blooms from the plant. So if you're more of a plant person, you can grow some plants and you can rub the plants and then smell your hand, and it's going to smell like the plant. And so that's another way to utilize aromatherapy. And it can actually be really great for kiddos who have sensory processing disorders. I find that that's really helpful for my daughter whenever she's feeling anxious, and it takes you outside or it takes you into nature.
I love it just because it's like my approach to well-being is almost like, I don't know have a good way to say this, but it's just throwing spaghetti at the wall and doing like just seeing what supports me. And sometimes, right? Like it's just like trying all the things. And I like this one because it's little, it's easy, it's inexpensive, and it certainly is not going to hurt anything. And so that's why I wanted to just kind of see if there's anything that you would have to share. And I think that's really, really valuable. So thank you for sharing that. Well, Queren, it was so amazing to talk to you. I'm really glad we finally got to connect. As we wrap up this conversation, I just wanted to see if there's anything still left on your heart that you want to share with this special Needs Mom community.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me and allowing the space. I think the last thing I could say, and maybe I've already said it many times, but it's just allowing yourself to have a space when you're having really tough emotions. One thing I've learned is to sit for a minute and accept where I'm at and then carry on, because so many times you can have a reaction to something that's happening. And whenever I have just a reaction over something happening, it generally ends up becoming bigger and bigger and bigger. And so just allowing yourself to be in a space. And I'm not saying like bottling it up because that's not healthy either, but just like asking yourself the questions like, why am I feeling like this? Why am I in this place? What do I need to do to get out of this space? And you can do it while you're with your plants or your essential oils.
That's really, really good wisdom. And I'd say I'm going to add a little bit to say that usually when we're reacting in these hard emotions, it's usually in service of avoiding actually feeling the emotion. So I love your picture of just like sitting with it for a minute or two, being curious about it. And I'm going to tell you my little gardening analogy just because I think you might love it. And I've been trying to figure out how to incorporate it into the podcast. I'm a fellow plant lover. I studied horticulture, so I don't know that you even knew that about me. Yeah, so we can like geek out afterwards. So I go out to water my garden, and I have the hose and I'm just watering it, and I do all hand irrigation because I like the act of daily tending to my garden. And I noticed that when I'm watering, I'm kind of like, oh man, that leaf has powdery mildew. What am I going to do about that? Or, oh, like looking for, snails or looking for different insects, and then celebrating new blooms and kind of seeing new fruit come on my zucchini plant. And I'm doing this and I'm like, this is such a good model, a picture of what it's like to tend to yourself. You just notice and observe, and you see the things that are going really well, like the new blooms. And then you see like, oh, shoot, we got some powdery mildew over there. And oh, look, that one didn't make it. And I just think it's a really good picture for how to be with yourself. And so I don't know. I thought you would appreciate my garden analogy.
I do.
Individual coaching and self-care, if you will.
The gardening is such a great metaphor for so many things, but also like the act of gardening is so therapeutic and super helpful. And so that is my passion of like connecting people to gardening in some ways.
Thank you so much. And I cannot wait to share your story with this community.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me.
One more thing before we officially wrap up this show. Sometimes when I'm listening to podcasts, I have the experience of wanting more. I'm listening at the very end thinking, I sure wish that episode didn't end. I invite you, if you feel in any way the same way, I invite you to the Special Needs Mom podcast community, which is a free group that I host on Facebook, where we as a community of fellow moms who listen to this podcast and are experiencing life in similar shoes, get to talk to one another, get to share stories, get to actually interact. I hope you'll consider joining. See you over there.